Hello, my name is Anand Nandkumar. I'm an associate professor of strategy and entrepreneurship at the Indian School of Business. Now, let me talk about a project that I'm working in the area of entrepreneurship and clusters. IPR, intellectual property rights, is something that I'm quite passionate about researching in the area of innovation. And when it comes to entrepreneurship, I like doing a variety of things. One of the things that I'm quite interested in doing is to link the personal preferences of entrepreneurs to entrepreneurial strategies and performance. If you skim through the literature either talks about the link between entrepreneurial strategy and performance, or just talks about the personal characteristics of entrepreneurs and their consequences on performance. So I'm specifically interested in how opportunity costs of entrepreneurship, right, which is an aspect of the personal preferences of an entrepreneur, shapes entrepreneurial strategies and performance. If you think about the entrepreneurship activity in India, there's been a tremendous exponential increase in the entrepreneurship activity in India since 2010. Dominated, of course, by the information and the communication technology sector. If you also look at how these different waves of clustering started to pan out, startup activity was mostly clustered in the Pune and the Mumbai region. This is circa 1990 to 1999, when, of course, the startup activity was itself, relatively muted. The second wave of entrepreneurial clustering started to happen not only in Mumbai and Pune region, but also around the Bangalore region, right? So this is probably coincides with the rise or the maturity of the offshoring based startups in that part of India, right, Bangalore. More recently, we are seeing a lot of clustering of startups in the Delhi or the NCR region as well. And this is a region which is also the hosts for a lot of multinationals as well. The formation and sustenance of clusters is also sort of known with a technical term which is known as agglomeration. There are many reasons for agglomeration, and the idea of industries being agglomerated, or even innovation for that matter, being agglomerated or concentrated in an area is not new, right? So this has been occurring for a long period of time, and in fact, people like Alfred Marshall has actually written about it way back in the 1920s itself. Right? If you think about India, most of entrepreneurship is not as widespread as we might like it to be, but believe it or not, it's actually clustered just in a few regions in India. Our research, for example, suggests that about 2/3 of all the entrepreneurship activity in about 2016 was clustered just in 3 regions in India: Mumbai, Pune, the NCR region, and of course Bangalore. We were very intrigued to find this, and we wanted to find out what sustains or even creates these kinds of clusters and sustains them over such long periods of time. We are not talking, in the case of India, we are not talking about a very, very long period of time. We are talking about maybe a decade or so. For the most part, the reasons why they come into being as well as why they are sustained tend to be the same. One of the things that Alfred Marshall essentially talks about is this idea of regional attributes. Right, what are we talking about when we speak about regional attributes? That could be a very specific input-output relationship. For example, one of the reasons why a lot of non-ICT industries tend to be clustered in the Silicon Valley is because ICT itself is a general-purpose technology that's used as an input to a lot of these processes, and because ICT is used as an input to a lot of companies' processes, a lot of industries tend to be clustered in and around the Silicon Valley itself. Sometimes clusters are also come into being simply because of labor. So firms need to locate themselves close to where talent is, and some forms of talent is only available in certain parts of the world, as a result of which these clusters are formed. And as long as this talent market continues to prosper, these clusters also continue to exist. The third reason is because of knowledge. Contrary to what we might believe, knowledge does not travel very well. It tends to be closeted or concentrated in a particular region, and companies tend to locate in specific regions simply to access this knowledge. In order to understand the genesis of entrepreneurial clusters as well as their sustenance in India, we went about interviewing a lot of entrepreneurs in India, right? And what we found was absolutely fascinating. So it was essentially about their opportunity cost. What are we talking about? So there are different kinds of entrepreneurs with different attributes. Some of them come from very renowned colleges such as such as ISB, IIMs, and so on and so forth. And while the others tend to be somewhat from a modest kind of an educational background. Some of them whose opportunity cost of entrepreneurship was quite large, simply because if they were not pursuing entrepreneurship, they could actually be doing something quite substantial and making a lot of money for themselves. Whereas there were others, right, with modest backgrounds who did not have as successful educational backgrounds, and their alternatives were also modest, right? If they were not pursuing entrepreneurship, they would have probably had not much else to do, right, in terms of furthering their careers and so on and so forth. So these kinds of entrepreneurs are more interested in pursuing entrepreneurship simply as a matter of livelihood. How does this categorization link to the idea of entrepreneurship clusters itself? So what we found, which was equally fascinating, was this idea that the ones which had high opportunity costs wanted to locate to places that were filled with lots of economic activity, right? What was the logic there? Simply because they were burning opportunity costs as they were pursuing their entrepreneurial activity as well, right? So this category of entrepreneurs believe that they need to be located in places that were munificent with a lot of opportunities, places that had lots of multinationals, places in which they can, bounce back very quickly should their entrepreneurial ventures actually fail. Whereas the other category, right, so the ones with low opportunity costs of entrepreneurship that would rather linger on and continue to do entrepreneurship for want of other outside options, just said that, okay, you know what, we want to locate ourselves not in these large cities. We would rather prefer to locate ourselves in these smaller cities because they're less expensive. The costs of operations are not very high. We would rather locate ourselves in these smaller regions because labor is also not as expensive, even if it means that, it's much harder to bounce back, right? Because this idea of bouncing back was not very important for them, simply because they are entering entrepreneurship with this idea of lingering on, right? Not with this idea of up or out, which was true with the other category. If you skim through some of the data, more than about 90% of the startups fail within the first 5 years since they were established, right? So failure is the norm in entrepreneurship. So what happens with the cluster in these regions such as Mumbai, NCR, and so on, which are like these honeybees of opportunities, is that it also attracts these high quality ventures and entrepreneurs themselves, which is why these areas are, like they say, success creates success. These areas attract high quality entrepreneurs who also eventually do quite a bit better than some of the entrepreneurs in other, maybe the other parts of India as well. So for one, if you're an entrepreneur, this gives you somewhat of an insight about where should you do your startup, right? Should it be in a small city? Should it be in one of these entrepreneurial clusters themselves? And one thing that you might really want to think about is what is your opportunity cost of entrepreneurship, and that might give you clues about where you should locate your startup. And if you're a policymaker, you might also wonder, what should I do if I want to make my region sort of the entrepreneurial capital of India? The standard response is, why don't we just create a cluster? But is that going to sustain them? If you believe our results, probably that might be an interesting starting point, but they may not be quite enough. What might be enough is also making the region munificent with full of opportunities. You might also want to, for example, attract a lot of top employers, multinationals such as Googles and the Microsofts of the world, who people might also be wanting to work for. Right, so the standard policy response that would attract these high quality entrepreneurs and also enable them to bounce back should their ventures not succeed as well. Thank you. I hope this research enables you to understand how entrepreneurial clusters come into existence and how they are sustained as well.